Hello, everyone. This is Pastor Ryan Pronzinski of Christ Lutheran Church in Michigan Center, Michigan, and this is my Chair Chat Daily Devotion for Monday, October 5th, 2020. Peace be with you. These video devotions are intended to help you engage your life of faith during this time of pandemic, and so with engagement in mind, I encourage you to leave constructive comments, questions, or prayer requests in the comments section below. And I promise that I will get to these in the following videos. As always, I encourage you to engage with one another either in this space or in any other space, because when we engage and learn and do faith together, we learn more, we retain more, and we learn best. And faith is a communal process, a communal practice. It is not an individualistic practice. So find ways to engage meaningfully, please. The readings that get put forth each day in these videos come from what's called the Daily Revised Common Lectionary, which is a church calendar reading schedule, and it can be found online. Since we are in year A of that reading schedule, the readings for today, which are in the description below, are as follows. We have Psalm 144 today, Ezekiel chapter 19, verses 10 through 14, and 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 through 10. But before I get to those readings, as always, I'd like to invite anyone out there who is watching these videos to come and join us at Christ Lutheran Church for the live streaming of our worship services. We've been using Facebook Live to do this, and the link to our Facebook Live videos is in the description below. We do the live stream of our Sunday morning worship service at 9:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And so if you click on that link below on Sunday mornings, you can see the live stream, click on it and join us, leave prayer requests in the comments section, maybe even song requests, and participate in worship with us that way. Also, if you happen to be in the Michigan Center, Jackson area, this coming Sunday, we will be having our outdoor worship again, and so you can come and bring a lawn chair or sit in your car, as most did last Sunday, because it was quite cool and a little damp, but we still worshiped, so please come and join us as you're able. All right, with all that being said, we move on to our first reading, which comes from Psalm 144, which reads as follows. Blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. My rock and my fortress, my stronghold and my deliverer, my shield in whom I take refuge, who subdues the people under me. O Lord, what are human beings that you regard them, or mortals that you think of them? They are like a breath. Their days are a passing shadow. Bow your heavens, O Lord, and come down. Touch the mountains so that they smoke. Make the lightning flash and scatter them. Send out your arrows and rout them. Stretch out your hand from on high and set me free and rescue me from the mighty waters, from the hand of aliens, whose mouth speaks lies and whose right hands are false. I will sing a new song to you, O God. Upon a 10-stringed harp I will play to you, the one who gives victory to kings, who rescues his servant David. Rescue me from the cruel sword, and deliver me from the hand of aliens, whose mouths speak lies and whose right hands are false. May our sons in their youth be like plants full grown, our daughters like corner pillars, cut for the building of a palace. May our barns be filled with produce of every kind. May our sheep increase by thousands, by tens of thousands in our fields. And may our cattle be heavy with young. May there be no breach in the walls, no exile, and no cry of distress in our streets. Happy are the people to whom such blessings fall. Happy are the people whose God is the Lord. Here ends the reading. So this is an interesting psalm because it puts next to one another, like right next to one another, two very different realities that the psalmist faces, which is war and hardship alongside peace and prosperity. War and hardship alongside peace and prosperity. And I don't have this in my notes, but kind of as a side note, sometimes like the one instigates the other. When you have peace and prosperity and your neighbors around you do not, at least, in ancient times, oftentimes the, warlike machine of your neighbors wanted to come and plunder you because of your peace and prosperity. So it might seem strange that the two of those could exist side by side, but it is possible. And so the psalmist in one breath asks God to ready their hands for battle, right? Their hands for battle, their fingers for war, and for God to bow the heavens down, and shoot down like Thor out of the sky and smite the enemy that threatens them. I mean, that's how I read the psalm, right? Because the psalmist does say, bow the heavens and come down, right? Make the mountains smoke. I just think of the Avengers, right? When Thor comes down and boom, and lightning flashes everywhere, right? Like this is kind of the thing the psalmist is asking for in one breath, right? That God would prepare them for battle and come down like a weapon of war. And then in the very next breath, in this same psalm, the psalmist asks for healthy children, crops that have a good yield, and livestock that produces lots of young. Just what a juxtaposition, right? Now, where it gets even more interesting, though, is that the psalmist ends by stating that their happiness rests on these final blessings of healthy family, good crops, and fruitful livestock. And so, what I would hope you all out there could gain from this psalm is the recognition that most of us, most of you, right, who are watching this video, you don't have to ask in prayer, train my hands for war and ready my fingers for battle. Being a veteran, even though I didn't have to fight in war, I know what it is to go through the training, and it's not fun. And so to feel like you have to ask for that is a sad thing. I wish we could live in a world where no one had to feel like they needed their hands to be trained for war or their fingers for battle. And so I would hope that most of you don't, since you don't have to ask for that in prayer, and that most of us only have to ask God for the other things in this psalm, like that psalm could be a gift, a reminder of that reality, right? That most of your prayers are, only needing to ask for healthy children, and that jobs are meaningful and provide what you need, and that we do live in a time of relative peace. And so thanks be to God for this time of relative peace that we do have. I know there are wars, and we're technically still in a war with Afghanistan, but for the majority of us, we don't have to prepare our hands and our fingers for battle. So the other thing then I would have you wonder is this: since you're only on the one half of this prayer, and thanks be to God for that, since you don't have to prepare your hands for battle, right, which is destructive and not constructive, what would God have you prepare your hands for today? Like, how could we rearrange this prayer a little differently, right? And maybe start with the asking for the healthy kids and a job that's meaningful and produces what we need, not just for ourselves but for others. How might we ask God to prepare our hands? I mean, there is a little bit of an allusion to something more constructive in the psalm when he talks about a harp. You need your fingers to play the harp. But what would you have God prepare your hands and your fingers for today? What would God have you do with your hands today? And maybe that's more metaphorical than literal, but that's what I'd have you ponder. What opportunity to serve God and your neighbor would God have you ready yourself for today? Even if it's not something that you'll do today, maybe it's something you'll do next week or next month or next year. What is something that God would have you prepare for, ready yourself for, train for, in order to help serve God and your neighbor in love? All right, on to Ezekiel chapter 19, verses 10 through 14, which reads as follows. Your mother was like a vine in a vineyard, transplanted by the water, fruitful and full of branches from abundant water. Its strongest stem became a ruler's scepter. It towered aloft among the thick boughs. It stood out in its height with its mass of branches. But it was plucked up in a fury. Cast down to the ground, the east wind dried it up. Its fruit was stripped off, its strong stem was withered, the fire consumed it. Now it is transplanted in the wilderness into a dry and thirsty land, and fire has gone out from its stem, has consumed its branches and fruit, so that there remains in it no strong stem, no scepter for ruling. Here ends the reading. So in my Oxford Study Bible, my notes have that the vine in this reading is the southern kingdom of Israel, that is Judah, right, where Jerusalem resides. And the strongest stem of this vine is King Zedekiah, so one of the kings of Judah. And what this passage laments is the loss of life and grandeur of both the kingdom and the king to the, quote, east wind, which is the king Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, right? The Babylonian captivity. So the enemy to the east comes in and transplants this vine, this king and kingdom, to a dry, weary, desolate place in captivity. And so I think what's nice about having this reading from Ezekiel in our readings for today is it helps us to appreciate Psalm 144. When you have enemies like Babylon and King Nebuchadnezzar who do come and pillage and plunder, it makes sense to have a prayer to God that says, God, help prepare my hands for war and my fingers for battle, right? But what's most interesting, though, about Ezekiel comparing the life of God's people to a vine, a vineyard, and a garden, if you will, right? Because none of this grows in like a single solitary place. The interesting thing about this imagery is that God is the ultimate gardener, right? God is the one who brought forth beauty, life, and light. That is a garden, right? Think Genesis chapter 1, the Garden of Eden. This was brought forth from darkness and chaos. Just, if you have a Bible, just read Genesis 1:1, right? That's how the beginning of the Bible starts. It's darkness and chaos. And God speaks, which is, I'm alluding to the next reading we'll get to. God speaks, and then light and life happens, and a garden full of life and light happens, right? We call that garden earth, in part, right? Because part of that creation story is the wholeness of earth. Anyway, and then just to continue this imagery a little bit, in Exodus, or maybe it's after the Exodus, it's in Numbers. God is the one who made Aaron's staff. That is, Aaron, who was the speaker on Moses' behalf, who becomes the priestly family of God, right? God makes Aaron's staff which is a literal dried up, broken off piece of wood, kind of like in the imagery today, God makes this staff bloom in the wilderness. Yes, that's an actual story. Crazy. So the imagery in Ezekiel today, right, which helps people think back on these older stories in the Bible, the imagery itself is what's so hopeful. Because although life might seem dried up and dead, right, as we'll hear later on, well, I don't know if we'll read it, but if you were to keep reading Ezekiel in chapter 37, we read that God is able to transform that which is dried up and dead into new life, right? And that's who God was from the beginning, turning darkness and chaos into light and fullness of life, transforming a dried up piece of wood and a staff and Aaron into this flowering, abundant staff of flowers and life. Right? This is who God is. God makes a way where there seems to be no way. God makes life where life seems impossible. And so I'd have you ponder, what parts of your life seem dried up right now? And how might God be working to bring about something new in your life? All right, on to 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 through 10. Come to him, that is Jesus, a living stone, though rejected by mortals, yet chosen and precious in God's sight. And like living stones, let yourselves be built into a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For it stands in Scripture, "See, I am lying in Zion, a stone, a cornerstone, chosen and precious, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame." To you then who believe, he is precious, but for those who do not believe, the stone that the builders rejected has become the very head of the corner, and a stone that makes them stumble and fall, and a rock that makes them fall. They stumble because they disobey the word, as they were destined to do. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people, in order that you may proclaim the mighty acts of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's chosen people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Here ends the reading. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, God's own people, in order that you might proclaim the mighty acts of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Here in 1 Peter, Peter echoes the power of God that was lifted up today in Ezekiel. The power of God which takes that which seems destroyed and left in dryness and darkness and lifelessness, and then brings this lifeless thing to a place of life and light. And this life and light is built up on the Lord of light and life in Jesus, who overcomes death and darkness. Right? So both Ezekiel and Peter understand that God is one who brings forth beauty, light, and life from darkness and chaos, and makes us something beautiful and new, even as we journey through these dark, hard, chaotic moments in life where new life and abundant life feels impossible. And as I have in my notes, we live in a pretty dark time right now. Between the pandemic and all the illness and the anxiety around the illness, the political and civil unrest right now, not just in our country, but in so many others, a poor economy in the country, but also around the world with people out of work, refugees and people fleeing violence. Just for us, just disrupted life, whether that's social life or even church life. And just there's right now a whole heap of uncertainty. All of that and more, right? In the midst of it all, life can feel pretty dark and foreboding right now. However, we are reminded today that, God is the one who calls us forth from darkness into his marvelous light, right? It's not as though God abandons us to the darkness, or if we happen to generate some darkness, then God leaves us alone and says, you idiots. No, God is the one who calls us forth from darkness, whether it's something we bring on ourselves or someone brings on us, or it just happens to happen. It doesn't really matter. God is the one who calls us forth from darkness and chaos, just like in Genesis chapter 1. And God calls us forth from this place of darkness into a place of light and life. And no, God may not flash down out of the heavens in a loud thunderclap like Thor. That may not happen. But God does speak to and for you every day. Right? Creation would not exist if God did not keep speaking words of life that keeps all of this going. And the reality is, even a whisper from God has the power to bring you to this place of light and life. It doesn't need to be a loud thunderclap from heaven, but just a still small voice and a whisper. And so I wonder, and I would have you wonder, how might God be speaking in the dark places of your life today? How has God brought you out of dark places in your life before? And who could you share these stories with? Because we all need to hear them so that we can see and trust that God can bring us out of our dark places too. Sometimes we need other people's stories to remind us of how God can do it in our own life. Right? So how might you share that story with others so that you can, quote, proclaim the mighty acts of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, end quote. And a blessing for you all. God speak to you this day. God speak to you this day and bring you to places of light and life. Amen. With that, I say to you again, peace be with you, and I will speak to you tomorrow.